You're listening to the Wool Academy podcast. This is episode number 61.
Hello and welcome. My name is Elisabeth van Delden, and once a week we talk to an industry expert from the wool industry supply chain from farm to fashion and beyond, delivering strategies and insights to be successful in wool and showcasing those beautiful stories wool has to tell.
Today's episode is a rerun of episode number 34 with Louis de Beer. Louis is the CEO of Cape Wools, the National Wool Industry Association in South Africa. Louis shares the most amazing stories about wool growers in South Africa, and this is part of the follow-up from the IWTO Wool Roundtable that was held at the beginning of December in Port Elizabeth. New episodes will launch in January, and until then, enjoy this interview with Louis de Beer from Cape Wools. Today on the show, I am happy to welcome Louis de Beer. Louis is the CEO of Cape Wools in South Africa. Cape Wools is the South African wool industry body promoting the interests of its members involved in production, trading and consumption of South African wool. Louis has been with Cape Wools for over 6 years, and I look forward to learning much more about the South African wool industry from him. Welcome, Louis. It's great to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Elisabeth. It's great to be on the show today.
I just gave a very brief introduction, but please tell us a little bit more about your background and the work that you do in the wool industry.
Okay, I studied at the University of Stellenbosch. I reckon that's probably where most people's lives begin. Got involved in accounting and financial management. Furthered my studies through UNISA, which is the University of South Africa, and completed the CTA degree, which is the Certificate of Accounting, in the theory of accounting, and basically did that to have a good basis to work from. You know, when you're a young man and you're starting out, it's very difficult to know exactly what to do and where you're going. And at that point, that was a good stepping stone to embark life on. From then, I've continued my studies. I think it's a continual journey through life. Currently busy with studies through Regenesis University, and basically been with the wool industry now for 6 years. Before that, I was involved in the wine industry. I got involved in wine after my studies at Stellenbosch. It was just a passion, getting involved in agriculture. Literally starting in the beginning in production, producing, growing grapes, harvesting, and just being on the production side. But very quickly came to understand that I needed to find another way forward for myself and then my young wife. And that's why I embarked on financial management and got involved on the management side of affairs. And just happily married, 3 lovely children, and very happy to be serving the wool industry at the moment.
Yeah, someone else on the show once said that actually wool and wine often go well together, that they often are carried out in the same countries. So that is then also true for you. You found a job in wine, but also now in wool in South Africa.
No, on the wine side, it was quite interesting that the wine farmers are totally focused to wine. Totally focused to wine. So you really won't find a wine farmer diversifying or visibly diversifying into wool sheep farming, which is contrary to what the history dictates. Because initially they were very closely linked, especially when Simon van der Stel was involved in the Cape. And on the wool side, you've got wool sheep farmers was entirely just focused on wool, and that's more understandable because you can farm wool over a greater part of the country, which you can't do with wine. But there's a huge opportunity for the wine farmers to actually diversify and to use wool sheep farming in their operations. And I'm actually on record in a magazine trying to convince the wine farmers that they can make up their profits by farming with wool as well. So that's quite a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting to see if your voice is heard, and you have to tell us in a few years if wine farmers did embark into wool. That would be interesting. And now that you've come
Yeah.
to the wool industry 6 years ago, tell me what what did you learn and what fascinates you the most about the wool industry?
I think the wool industry's complexity. You would think that you would arrive in wool and it's fairly straightforward. It's the product of the back of a sheep, and how complicated and how difficult can it really be? But I was quite amazed at the level of expertise required to really, really, really understand and trade and process wool. For the novice, you would think wool is wool, but the more you learn about wool, the more there is to learn about wool, and that for me has been really fascinating. I think it's not something that you will ever really master. You will reach a level of expertise, but from what I see, it will always keep you busy, and you'll always be able to learn something more. So the actual fiber itself was quite impressive. I didn't foresee that, and that's been quite an exciting and interesting journey. For the rest, I think the processes are as complex. It's quite a long value chain, all the way from the from the producer through to the broker, through to the buyer, onto the early stage processor, and then spinning, weaving, and garment manufacturing in our case. And trying to understand all the complexities within each of those individual areas, requirements. That's also been quite a fascinating journey. Trying to comprehend how the entire value chain feeds into the next step. For the rest, I think the people are also quite interesting. You as the CEO of Cape Wools, you meet a lot of interesting people along the way, not only in South Africa but also internationally, and seeing the different countries with all their different challenges and how they work together, and then comparing that to South Africa and understanding how South Africa works, and that's been quite a journey, and an exciting one at that.
What you're saying is a good sign for me, because that'll mean that it'll never get boring on my podcast to talk about wool, because there are so many topics to dive into. And I agree, it is very complex and diverse indeed.
I think the correct English word is probably intricate.
Intricate.
It's intricate. You would think if you look from an outside perspective that it would be fairly simple and fairly straightforward. And yes, when you look at it in its rough form, it is. It's quite easy to understand the process. But when you get involved in the detail and you understand the level of expertise at each and every stage of the process, you're just impressed by the intricacy involved in all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's a good word for me to learn as well. And now that we have you on the show, please tell us more about Cape Wools in South Africa.
It's fairly straightforward. Cape Wools is the industry representative organization for the South African wool industry. We represent the value chain all the way from producers through to early stage processors. We have a board of 10 members that represent each area within the value chain, and we are mandated by industry to perform certain tasks on behalf of the industry, and they really are quite varied. We do promotion, both international and local promotion of wool. At the moment, we refer to this as wool awareness, and promoting the wool awareness within our markets. We are also responsible for research and development. We have a research committee that works closely together with the different research institutions, and we try and identify topics of interest to the industry, and then we research them as well as possible. We're also responsible for the secretarial services for the industry. As an industry, you generally have to meet quite often to discuss all the different issues. So there are various committees originates from the board that we service as well. And then I think one of the probably the most important, or one of the most important services we deliver is education to the industry. We do that using production advisory services, basically extension services that we supply to the farmers. We subcontract this service through the National Wool Growers Associations, who are trusted partners of Cape Wool's by this time. And what else do we do? We do so much, Elisabeth. And production advisory services, and then of course we also provide statistical services. One thing which is which I'm extremely proud of is the industry's ability to measure itself and to deliver this information to parties that aren't involved in the industry. So we track our sales, we track our production, we track our markets, and all of this is provided through our website to any party that is interested. And that's specifically done to ensure that our industry is transparent, that it's accessible, that new market participants know and have the information at hand and can participate in the market. And then of course, we are the leading role player within the industry, and there's a great responsibility on Cape Wool's and specifically the board of Cape Wool's to ensure that the leadership within the industry at an industry level, obviously not at the commercial level, but at an industry level, is performed diligently. So in dealing with all these affairs, we try and make sure that the leadership element is built in, and that we provide leadership in each instance where it's required.
I think that's really important what you're saying about the leadership, and for sure during my time at IWTO I thought that was very visible, that South Africa as a wool industry was stepping up and to lead wherever possible, also on an international level. So I think that is really important, so a very vital role for Cape Wool's. And what always when I think of South Africa, to be honest, I would typically think of wild animals and safari, maybe good wine, but I wouldn't typically expect that there's such a big wool industry with actually a very, very long history as well. I read that the first sheep actually arrived in South Africa in 1789. So maybe I'm assuming more people don't know all these details. So maybe if you could give us a little bit of a brief overview of the South African wool industry history.
I think it's important to list a little bit of a controversial story in this. Unfortunately, I'm not a historian, Elisabeth, so I'm not going to be able to take you through the entire history, but I will tell you the story of Colonel Robert Gordon. And poor Colonel Robert Gordon, during the British attack on the Cape in 1799, was accused of being a traitor, and this poor gentleman ended up committing suicide, which was obviously quite sad, and especially so for his widow Susanna. And at that point, she was so downhearted that she decided to leave the country, and she also decided to take everything with her. But in the process, before she left, she sold 26 merino sheep to 2 British ships that were passing the Cape with supplies to Australia. And obviously she took some of the sheep with her to England as well. But the important thing here is that not all the sheep actually left South Africa's shores, because Colonel Gordon had sold a few of these merinos to the Van Renen brothers, and the one chap's name was Sebastian Valentine and the other chap's name was Jan Gijsbert, and he'd sold these sheep onto them before his death. Now the Van Renen brothers were obviously quite industrial, and they mated the merino rams to their 300 hand-picked indigenous ewes, and their crossbred offspring, plus a few merinos that had been kept apart in a separate flock, were the start of the South African wool industry. So there's a little piece of interesting history for you.
So yeah, that was like an interesting story of the beginning of the South African wool industry. And give us a little bit of an overview how the wool industry is set up today in South Africa.
Look, I think the most important part of the industry at the moment in South Africa is that it runs on a free market in a free market economy. We have no government regulation. We have very little government interference. We also have very little government support. So our producers are successful in their own rights, and I think that is important for us because it means that our producer base in South Africa is healthy and well founded. The rest of the industry, we have between 4,500 and 9,000 commercial producers, and then we have between 30 and 55,000 communal producers. When we say communal producers, it refers to people that are involved in wool production, but they farm collectively, and they farm in regions where communal grounds are used for pastures. So that's what we refer to. That would typically be the Transkei and the Ciskei, which are parts of the Eastern Cape. But yeah, we support between 4,500 and 9,000 and 30 and 55,000 communal producers annually. The sophistication levels in the industry are such that we can pay out anything from half a kilogram of wool delivered to market to whatever the biggest supplier delivers to market, and that's an incredible claim to be able to make. That within system of distributing 52.5 million kilograms of wool this year, we are able to pay on an individual basis from the smallest to the largest supplier of wool. For the rest, I think the industry is fairly traditional. You've got your producer base, you've got your brokers, and then you have your buyers that purchase the wool for their clients on a weekly basis at auction. We have 35 auctions for this year. We have one more than the previous year, and after auction, the wool is shipped to our clients. We sell most of our wool at the moment to the processors in China. We also have a lot of wool going through to the Czech Republic and India as well. But I think those are the channels that serve most of the wool being sold globally. So that's more or less what our industry looks like at the moment. So.
Wow, yeah, thank you for giving us that overview. And also, please talk a little bit about what makes South African wool special and what kind of products would it typically be used for?
Well, first of all, our wool goes into suiting, and there's a pretty good market for menswear, including suiting and jackets at the moment. Always has been, and hopefully in the future will always continue. And yes, our wool. We generally don't produce wool over 24 microns. It's pretty much all merino wool, which is renowned for its good handle. Characteristics of South African wool. I think the most important, what we pride ourselves on as an industry, is the good classing standards. We are still in a position to claim that where wool is classed particularly well, which is important because the buyer and the processor that uses our wool can produce a superior product because the uniformity within his selection is better and more easily managed. And for the rest, I think our animal welfare status within South Africa is also important. We do have the code of best practice, so we do adhere to the code of best practice as a country. But obviously, the winds of change are about, and you do have retail requiring further standards. You have commercial interests where people require auditing and verification of on-farm practices. You have a bigger requirement for proof of origin, and this is something that we're working on in the industry. I think, as I said, our animal welfare standards are highly regarded, specifically because of our code of best practice, which we adhere to. and those are the factors that make South African wool most popular.
So yeah, that's really interesting, and I understand from what you're saying that actually all of the South African clip is then being exported and not used in South Africa.
Yeah, we do process a little bit of wool locally. Our early stage processors do receive and process wool, which is then exported in top form. So, and then there is a bit of beneficiation that happens in South Africa, but the lion's share of wool goes directly to the export market.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And
Sure.
I understood the last time I had the chance of visiting South Africa last August, and what I understood back then is that there were actually more farmers coming into wool, and that there was kind of a hype. So maybe tell us a little bit how the South African wool industry developed over the last decade, and how is it doing today, and maybe also give some reasons why it is the case.
Elisabeth, we had a look at the industry 3 years ago, and some of the members of the Wool Trust specifically wanted to see a unified action launched within the industry that would pursue a common vision for the industry. So they tasked Cape Wools to have a look at this, and which we did, and the board of Cape Wools identified an opportunity within wool for growth. Now, the opportunity that they identified, if you look back into the history of wool all the way through from the 1980s, 1990s, the stockpile in Australia, the stockpile globally, then when it was eventually sold out in 2001, subsequently to that, sort of a free market demand, market supply scenario where there was balance between supply and demand, or more so than in the past. And having looked at all those factors, then looking at the decline in wool production, specifically over the last 3 years, actually in that time, so the last 5 years, between South Africa and Australia, you came to the point where we identified a market gap, which would be called a market gap if you were a commercial organization. But being an industry organization, this market gap was then called an opportunity. A market was basically an opportunity for growth, and we debated this across the industry for quite some time, and we all agreed that this opportunity was real. That there was an excess in demand for wool globally of at least 25 million kilograms of wool, which is significant because this is roughly 50% of our current production.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did at that time was to not be prescriptive as to the different role players' actions that they had to take, but rather went about it in speaking to all the role players, including government and all the different departments and all the role players in agriculture, informing them of this opportunity and telling them that this was very real within the wool industry, and that the wool industry had a contribution to make to the South African GDP, and to grow by 50%, and to basically earn extra foreign income to the value of between 1.5 and 2 billion rand. And with all good plans, it takes a lot of time to actually get the ball rolling. During that same period, we experienced probably one of the worst droughts that South Africa has experienced ever, which put paid a little bit to our initiative. But despite that, the message carried that the industry was doing well, that there was an opportunity, that people should focus on wool sheep farming if they had to make a choice to get involved in agriculture, and they had a choice to make between the different segments of agriculture, that they should seriously consider wool sheep farming as a very, very good alternative. And I'm very happy to say that 3 years after starting the initiative, and literally 2 years after having conveyed the message, we've increased our production with 5% this year, which is an extra 2.5 million kilograms of wool, more than we had last year, and that despite the drought. So we are finding that people, new entrants, are both entering the market, producing wool, and current producers are producing more wool. Obviously, we've been blessed with the wonderful conditions within the industry supporting this initiative, and that was what this initiative was based on, was the fact that the wool price was continuing to increase, the price for mutton was continuing to increase, and our assumption was that this would continue to do so, not only in the short and medium term, but also in the long term. And we very often hear at the meetings we attend of the wool pipeline that's empty. We have our own experience of the demand for wool, which is communicated to us through the industry, and it's just a wonderful picture at the moment. So yes, we are driving the growth initiative quite strongly in South Africa. What we did need this year to I think really drive it was some good rains, and yeah, we're experiencing a huge storm in Cape Town as we speak, and hopefully the drought in the northern and southern Cape will be lifted, and if all goes well, we should have a bumper crop next year as well.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting, and I actually didn't know all this these initiative by Cape Wool, so I think it's really fascinating to hear that. And yeah, I think it's amazing that you were able to increase your wool production by 5%. And yeah, fingers crossed that we will have a good season also next year. And
it's actually interesting, Elisabeth. Sorry if I may interrupt you. It's actually quite interesting the effect that you receive from participants in the wool industry when you invite them to participate as opposed to telling them what to do. And what we found is just by telling our responsible partners in the industry of the opportunity and just opening their eyes to this opportunity, we've actually been able to receive commitment from producers towards wool production, because they look at this and they say, but this is a wonderful opportunity, I should be part of this. And yeah, it's been quite an exciting experience.
Yes, I can imagine. But now you talked about the opportunities, but you also mentioned already a few challenges like the drought. Give us a little bit more details about the issues and challenges that South African wool is dealing with.
Well, I think the drought is definitely a challenge, but droughts come and go, and we have to be positive, and we have to accept that the drought will also pass. I think we have competing agricultural products that do influence production as well. Our biggest challenge at the moment is more political, and unfortunately, you can't have a growth initiative discussion without having this political involvement where South Africa is at the moment. I think political uncertainty is really stifling not only the growth of the country but also the growth of the wool industry. But despite that, there are still wonderful people in government supporting these initiatives and promoting production. So yeah, we do have our challenges in South Africa, but none of them insurmountable.
Okay, I like your optimistic view. And
Thank you.
and when I saw on your website that you also have a project where you are helping small rural sheep farming communities with their wool production. And you already talked about the communal farming in the beginning of our discussion. Can you tell us a little bit more about this program and what you have achieved so far?
Elisabeth, if it weren't for the project at the Mkeula village, just outside of Whittlesea, and its successes, I don't think the industry would have, or especially not from my office, would have been as passionate about the Eastern Cape's potential at this moment. I think one of the biggest challenges facing the Eastern Cape is soil erosion and land management. And I remember starting off in the wool industry and driving through the Eastern Cape, specifically on the way to Mthatha, and seeing the extent of the soil erosion and the degradation of the land, and thinking to myself, there is no way through this. But I've been proven wrong. The chaps at Mkeula village and the people involved in the Zulukama initiative, both from the Chris Hani District Municipality, the National Wool Growers Association, Indibano for Harvest, Olive Leaf Foundation, all our partners that have been involved, Mr. Ayanda Mwebi, all of them have shown me that with proper planning and good management, you can turn things around, and you can do that using wool sheep farming, and that's been extremely exciting. It's filled me with courage to tackle projects and to support projects being done in the Eastern Cape. And in the Eastern Cape, we produce 30% of South Africa's wool, and within South Africa, we have between 5.9 or call it 6 and 8.5 million hectares of unproductive land, and a lot of that is found in the Eastern Cape. And I think it's been quite successful in showing everybody in the Eastern Cape, from all spheres, the potential vested within the Eastern Cape for extended wool production. So a top project, very excited about it. I think the National Wool Growers Association have also been involved in distributing rams into the Eastern Cape. A very, very clever initiative. It adds I wouldn't call it passive, but let's say it's passive development, where once the rams have been distributed, the flock is regenerated and a better quality wool is produced, irrespective of the farmer and the producer's level of expertise and his management practices. And the communal wool production, as a result of this, has become more profitable because of the improved quality of their wool, and because of the improved profitability, you've seen more people get involved and more people benefit from wool production. So I think those are the two projects that stand out at the moment. There are others, in the country as well, but those two are close to everybody in the industry's heart.
And please explain a little bit more how communal farming exactly works. How is it set up?
Elisabeth, I want to make a joke, but I don't really want to joke about it. But when you grow up in an environment where you have choice, where when you wake up in the morning and you can decide what is going to happen to your business during the day, then it's very difficult to imagine a communal wool sheep farmer's day, because they do not have the level of choice that we have. So you can look at the communal wool sheep farming experience, and you can describe it in terms of choice. They are limited as to where their flock can graze. They are limited in terms of the planning that they can do, because they don't have ownership of their assets. So how does a communal wool sheep organization work, first of all, the land is communally owned. So there would be either a chief or a tribal authority that would be responsible of the ownership of the land. And the villages on that piece of property would have access to pastures, but those pastures would have to be shared. And at best, they could have an agreement where they can manage the pastures on their own terms. At worst, and this happens quite frequently, there will be no agreement, and the pastures are available to everyone. Makes it very difficult to plan. How do you plan your winter grazing for your flock when your next door neighbor has access to exactly the same pastures as yourself and may or may not be as good at planning as you are? So there are very different challenges within farming on communal properties. They do work. There are properties where the authorities and the producers have come to some sort of arrangement where they can produce in an orderly fashion. I think within that system, we have assisted as industry, have assisted in the development of 765 shearing sheds that formally deliver to the wool industry. But we have on record 1,225 shearing sheds. And the shearing sheds are literally wool growers associations where farmers shear collectively and send their wool to market. Our biggest challenge is the ownership of the land. The farmers have really struggled because they don't have access to collateral, and they can't finance their operations, and they can't access operational funding. But you can imagine, within that scenario, the challenges that you go through. I think it's a credit to the wool industry that this communal farming operation and the way it's driven can actually use wool sheep farming to benefit those communities in some way. It would be very, very difficult for them to plant and harvest grain, for example, just because the structure in deciding and planning and making decisions is so lengthy and so complicated. I hope I've given you a bit of a picture. I take my hat off to all the communal producers, or to all producers producing wool and any agricultural product within the communal properties.
So if I understand correctly, then the sheep are owned by a whole village. Then, like, everybody kind of owns the flock of sheep and take care of them. Or
no, they are individual ownership.
Okay.
So your individual producer will own his sheep. He may decide to pool his sheep into a collective flock, which may or may not be managed separate to himself. But then again, he also has the choice to manage his own flock and to drive his own flock independently of his neighbor.
Okay, but then he runs his sheep on the communal property, so he doesn't own the land.
He doesn't own the land, and he runs his sheep on the communal property.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, now that's clearer. Thank you. I'm sorry that for not being.
I have to apologize, Elisabeth, for the lengthy discussion around that topic. It's one that's quite close to my heart, and
I think it's
we get
fascinating.
quite passionate about it.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's why I asked you, because I think it's quite interesting, and not many people know about it. So, but I think at the same time, it's also an opportunity for these communities to make their living on wool and also, I guess, on the meat. And as you also said, they can improve the land from degradation through proper management.
I think the sad truth is that that within those regions there is a lot of poverty. The happy truth is that wool sheep farming provides a real financial benefit to all of the communities, to all of those rural communities. Yeah.
Yeah, and through the infrastructure that the wool industry is offering to them, they can actually participate in the international market.
Absolutely, and it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal to think that you can farm within those areas and have access, not quite direct, but have very easy access to the international market for wool. And not only that, at the same time, you can have access to a financial system that can reimburse you for the product that you've just sold.
Mm.
You don't have one of the biggest challenges experienced in South Africa in agriculture, specifically for the small and emerging farmers, is market access and route to market. And that is one of the biggest benefits of the wool industry. You do not have to worry about market access. It's transparent. You can see where your wool is being sold. It's sold at auction. There's absolute transparency. And on top of that, you have a route to market and market access. I don't know of any other industry that offers that benefit in its to the same level as the wool industry offers it to its producers. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and I
It's a
hope
pleasure.
that the work that you're doing there will continue successfully. And before we come to a close of today's show, how can our listeners connect with Cape Wools and find out more about your work?
I think the simplest is electronically, just to drop us an email. Drop us an email at Louis@Cape Wools, alternatively at Cape Wools. And if there is information that is already on our website, or if obviously the first port of call would be the website, you can check us out on www.capewools.co.za.
Great. And I'll make sure to link to the website also in the show notes. Well, thank you so much, Louis, for your time. And
thank you.
I wish you all the best and continued success for South African wool.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth, and I look forward to the update on this on this discussion, because we've got a lot to talk about.
Yes, indeed. Thank you and bye-bye.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
Hopefully you enjoyed this interview with Louis de Beer. If you want to find out more about Louis, about Cape Wools and all the other resources that he mentioned in the interview, just head on over to the show notes at elisabethvandelden.com/061. Once again, elisabethvandelden.com/061. One quick tip for you today. I have put together a wool calendar 2018 as a free download on my website. The wool calendar 2018 is a document that includes all relevant wool dates, fairs and events throughout the year 2018 as far as they are already available. This calendar can help you plan your 2018 and get you prepared for your social media activities as well as your travel well in advance. Download the calendar over at elisabethvandelden.com/wool-industry-calendar-2018. That is indeed a complicated link, so here it is once again. Visit elisabethvandelden.com/wool-industry-calendar-2018. But I will also make it available on the homepage of my website so that it's much easier to find. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week and bye for now.